Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Something More Fulfilling podcast. Today, we have Dr. Victoria Mensch, who is actually currently in Bali right now. So it sounds like she's in a very beautiful place. She's somebody that I've been interested in talking to because her work is focusing a lot on the things that we do in this podcast, which is looking at success and making sure that you're still finding success, but also finding happiness. So, without further ado, welcome, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Trung.
Fantastic. So, if somebody just clicked on this podcast today, why do you think they should listen for the next 30, 40 minutes?
Well, if somebody clicked on your podcast, I think the name actually talks about itself, something more fulfilling. So probably people who are searching for something, they're yearning for something more in their life. So, and that's what I usually talk about, right? So I normally talk and work with high achievers, people who checked all the check boxes. They have successful careers, successful businesses, whatever else you would qualify as success, or maybe people who are aspiring for that. And then one day they look around and they still feel that there's a hole. There's something more that they're yearning for, but not really clear what it is. So hopefully we can talk about that and see how you could actually be successful and happy at the same time.
Oh, so I'm so excited to dive into your experience because it sounds like you've been working with the top achievers. And so I understand that you went and got an MBA from UC Berkeley and then went and got a degree in psychology, I guess, as well. So what inspired you to go down that route?
Mm.
And then how did you end up looking at happiness and success at the same
Yeah.
time?
So I actually did it in reverse order. I got a PhD first, and then I decided to get an MBA. Yeah, so I originally I wanted to be a psychologist. So I went through all the steps. I got my bachelor, master, and PhD in psychology and in different started with medical psychology and then moved to social psychology. And then I actually worked with people for a little bit, and that's when I experienced burnout for the first time. And after that, which actually wasn't that prevalent, it wasn't such a widely accepted term what a burnout is. And now looking back, I said, oh, that's what it was. And then that's when I decided to pivot for the first time and said, well, probably that's the problem that I chose. So maybe business is my passion. So that's how it happens. I pivoted, got into the corporate career, decided to elevate my chances there with an MBA. And then from corporate went to more of an entrepreneurial business. And that's when I discovered that maybe psychology was my passion all along. What other factors that played into it that got me into burnout and sent me around to complete the full circle and come back to my roots. So that's how it happened.
Okay, so what did you find in entrepreneurship that maybe you felt wasn't aligned with maybe your true passion of psychology again?
Well, I think it's not as straightforward, right? So every time when I talk about fulfillment and balance and harmony, I think a lot of it is really personalized. So one of the myths out there, especially it's relevant to those who qualify as high achievers or those who are striving for that those achievement for success, I think believe in this myth that the achievement brings you happiness, right? So once I build a successful
Mm,
business, once I reach this certain level of revenue, once I get that promotion, once I get into that college and so on and so forth, then I'll be happy. Once I get that big house. So we kind of live in that chase of next big thing, being in the illusion that that will bring happiness. I think a lot of us really driven and motivated by that. So once I do this, then I'll be happy. And I think more and more people realize, and definitely research supports that it's not it. So just reaching that success and getting to that goal does not bring happiness on its own. It brings satisfaction for a short period of time, but then you go back into that cycle of so I think that's kind of what's important to realize. And more research comes on board saying that, well, it's actually the process, right? So happiness is a practice. And there's even research shows that people who are happy first, they can reach higher levels of success. So I think that's a very important shift that's happening right now. There's more and more realization that's happening right now. And we are kind of responsible for our state of happiness, and that will make it easier to reach success. At the end of the day, it is a practice. So it's not something that comes with just a pure fact of achievement and stays there forever and ever. It is actually something that you're responsible for, and there's steps to practice happiness to help you elevate that state consciousness and awareness that allows you to be in fulfillment.
There's so many things that I want to ask you about. I think you're right. The culture is achievement, right? And I think it is very much a Western civilization where we're, and especially possibly more in America than anywhere else, where people are just like, you need to earn more, make more money, get a bigger house, nicer car. And people get swept up in that, right? And of course, the social media culture really fuels that fire, right? So everybody wants to get more. I think that's just human nature, and I think more so in the Western culture. But it's easy for somebody that who has achieved success to realize that, or achieve success financially, we'll just call it that first, and then they look back on it and says, I'm really not that happy. And then, but how do you tell somebody that doesn't have it all yet that that's not everything? How do you teach them? Because you know what, everybody will tell you, I know money doesn't buy happiness, but I want to find out for myself.
Right.
So like, how, what lessons can you give them to say, hey, there isn't happiness, and you can intellectually understand it, but that doesn't make you want to achieve success less? Do
Well,
you?
it's not that you want your success less, right? It's really
Okay.
redefining what success means. And if for you at this time in your journey, success means a lot of money, that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting more. I think that's kind of a big push toward our evolution, right? So, what is it that more that you want?
Hmm.
And I think what's important to understand why you want it. So to that why, what is your why you want to have this money? And I think the realization is that brings more of a balance and happiness is that if is this something that comes kind of your intrinsic value, or this is something that was that you picked up from someone else, so it's not really kind of your drive, but it's something that's conditioned externally. So if it's like if you want to get the money just for the sake of it, for the power of it, just to say that I have 10 million or whatever in the bank, that will not bring happiness. I think that's the realization that needs to happen. So you have to have your why you want to do that. And it usually connected with the service. You know, I want to service more people. I want to give more. And that actually brings a sense of fulfillment much better than just, well, I have this money and now I can buy a big yacht. So I know it's a little bit packed, but there is a definition of
Hmm.
success that's individual and personalized for people. It could be that, yes, at this point in life, it's important for me to do that. For example, I want to have a certain amount so that I could feel safe, right? So I could feel safe and secure. So I could do
Hmm.
more towards my greater fulfillment. So that could be a great motivation, not just for the sake, well, I want to have more because somebody told me that that's success. So because that, I'll accept myself as enough as a success only when I have a certain amount of money in bank. Does that make sense?
Okay. So here's a question for you then. If somebody wanted some advice, okay, so obviously a monetary value of money, I think we all know intuitively that that's not going to buy us happiness, right? What should you be striving for as goals? Because you're going to go build that business, you're going to build that empire, whatever you feel like it is, whether it's working for somebody else, getting into the C suite, or, building that business. What should be their goals? Because if it's not just pure money, because that is a very good indicator of success, what are other indicators, or what should they be setting their eyes on?
Yeah. So I think that's a very good exercise for everyone to go through. That's definitely what we do in my practice. What is it that brings you harmony? How does that look like? Right. And again, as I said, we're all, each and every one of us is very unique people. We're driven intrinsically by different values and different motivations and different talents and gifts that we have to give to the world. Not only we have to, but we have them to share. For each of us, that kind of harmony and happiness could look differently. A lot of times we just go through life going, building that career, whatever, brick by brick, because this is the roadmap that somebody gave us. We're not questioning that. But the exercise that you want to do for yourself is that, what does it look like? So the life that I love, what does it look like? What does it feel like? How do I want to do this? This is an exercise, it's a purposeful exercise that you just sit down and do. A lot of times we go into the default mode. I don't want that, right? But what is it that I do want? And this is a very important question, because that actually brings you your why. And once you have that picture, like, oh, I want my day to do, I want my day to look like this. I want people around me to look like this. I want things around me to look like this. I want to feel like this. And you have that picture, you actually take time to really drop into the feeling of it and the knowing of it. Then you have the picture of the life that you want to live. And then you're moving toward that. Not again because you saw the magazine and the cover of a magazine, or you saw a big house that your neighbor bought, but because this is what you want, right? And that what you want actually has the biggest value and the biggest enoughness for you to move toward.
Yeah. So here's a question I have for you, because I think nowadays we are inundated with so many things that catch our eye, and things that we suddenly want suddenly somehow become needs,
Hmm.
right? And sometimes it's kind of hard to decipher and draw a line between what society tells us that we should want, right? And what we truly want. How do you help people decipher that? Because sometimes, even you ask people, what do you want? They give you an answer. And sometimes you're like, are you
Hmm.
sure? Because a lot of times you're still in society, right? You still want to be accepted.
Yeah.
And no matter how much we tell people that we care what people say, we strive to care a little less, or focus on the right people that we worry about what their opinions
Hmm.
are, and everybody else we can just kind of discard. So, how do you sift through that to understand, to truly know that what you want hasn't been really brainwashed into you to make it think
Yeah.
that that's kind of what it is? Because I'm not talking about just purely the easy stuff like, oh, I should get a Lamborghini, or I need a big house or a Rolex watch, which those obviously clearly are just showing signs of certain, like, flaunting your wealth, right? So that's kind of easy to kind of know for yourself that that's probably not what I care about. But about some of the other things, how do you decipher
Yeah.
that?
So you keep asking why, right? So you have your answer, and then on that answer you keep asking why. And it's like every time you get an answer, you keep asking yourself why do I want this, why. And at the end you could actually come down to what it is, and it usually some of those that, oh, because I want to be accepted, right? So, or because I want
Mm,
someone to see me this way. So when you get answers like that, you can continue answering that. And more often than not, you could get different answers of what it is that you want to do to achieve that why. So usually,
mm,
on the surface, like, I want a big house. Why? Well, because it's more comfortable to live in big house, right? So you continue asking why until you get to the answer that satisfies you. And at the end of the day, you are right? So there is this big push for, well, the answers are, we have to have our own internal compass of what's important, what's not important. But we are in the society. And sometimes the Lamborghini is the answer.
I should
Yeah,
quote you
I
as
just
that.
want to make sure
Sometimes
that,
Lamborghini is the answer.
not, don't invalidate that that feeling of satisfaction of driving a Lamborghini. But yeah, especially people again who are tuning into the podcast with the name something more fulfilling, I think they are looking for deeper answers, right? So, and that's the way to do it. It's not a rocket science. There's no magic pill. Well, there might be, but it's actually questioning and being honest and true to yourself.
Yeah, I love that exercise. I was building my coaching business, and one of the exercises I went through was the seven whys, right? You just go 7 levels deep, and it usually gets to the core of who you are as a person and what really matters. And honestly, at first I thought it was kind of silly to do this, but just going through it was one of the most powerful realizations of, because most people probably go 1, 2, maybe 3 levels, but then when you get to the fourth, fifth, and sixth, and then you get to the seventh level, you're like, Holy shit, I don't think I've ever said that in my life, or knew I had that particular thought.
Wow.
And it usually goes down to something that is a feeling of enoughness
Mhm.
or a feeling of some kind of insecurity,
Yeah.
right? Or a true desire to get some kind of stability in your life when you may have grown up, say, in
Mhm.
chaos, where you're like, I just feel like I need to have control.
Mhm.
And you're just like, holy
Mhm.
moly, when you do this exercise, it's incredibly powerful.
Wow,
That's which
amazing.
yeah, it's very powerful. And sometimes, when you do the personal development stuff, some of it feels a little woo-woo. And 5, 7 years ago, I would have said, oh yeah, it's woo-woo stuff. I don't do that. I'm good. So let's jump into some of the work that you do for corporations and companies, the people that maybe work in the executive level stuff. What do you find that they struggle with the most? And what is something that is pervasive in what they are taught or preached
Mhm.
to that make it so pervasive in terms of just say climbing a corporate ladder?
Right. A lot of things that we're talking about when I work with executives is really that sense of being out of control. Like I'm not controlling my life, right? So a lot of kind of burnout and that feeling of a burnout and that symptoms of a burnout could be reduced down to kind of lost that feeling of loss of control. There's so many pressures from everyone, from the stakeholders, from the family, that I'm not in control of my own life anymore, right? So that's how you lose your compass, I'd say, because you're always kind of in a reactive mode towards the demands of others around you. So that's, I think, would be one of the most acute issues. And how do you actually get back into control? A lot of times the executives, when they come to me, they're on the brink of quitting, right? So I cannot take one more day of this anymore, and they place that kind of blame on the career part. This is not the right company, or this is not the right environment, or this is not the right culture, or it's just I'm not at the
Mhm.
right point of my in my life and my family obligations and so on and so forth. I certainly was a couple of times at that point in my life. So, and what we find usually is that when you put that control back, then you could thrive in that job. You could thrive in that corporation, in that career. You don't need to take drastic measures like quitting a job, because some of those practices and tools, once applied, they do bring that kind of harmony into your life. You put the healthy boundaries and you actually become more productive. A lot of times people come and say, well, I hate my job, I chose the wrong career. But once you go through the process of unwinding what it is exactly that they're not satisfied with, it's usually come down to that control. So, and once you feel in control again, the job is actually not that bad. And, I really like that job, and the company is really not that bad. I really like that company, and I am more productive, and I have more time to bring back the things that I like, and I have more time to grow as a person and have more time to grow as a professional as well.
So what do you
Question?
think that but what do you think that makes them feel out of control? Is it a mindset that they need to be the problem solver to everything that causes them to have the anxiety and feel like they're out of control? Or what is it that makes them feel like they're out of control?
That makes you feel out of control. But what I found that
Sure.
what we usually start with is kind of putting time back, prioritizing yourself. So a lot of times that people feel that they're fulfilling somebody else's agenda all the time, right? So I feel like I need to get on that 5 a.m. call. So I was in that position more than enough times to understand, right? You think that you have to be there at 5 a.m. Otherwise, you're not doing your job, or you're not going to be viewed as a valuable employee in your organization. And so sometimes people substitute kind of the number of hours that they put in a job with the value that they actually bring to that job. So, what we usually start with is creating more room in your day, prioritizing yourself, your needs and your wants, what people call self-care nowadays. So there is an exercise that we go
Mhm.
through to do that. I can explain a little bit more, but the idea behind this is that there's so many things outside of our control. Some of them are in close proximity. That's your job, your family, like your kids don't want to go to school. These are the things that you did not plan for in the morning, that they don't want to go to school. So you start getting into
Hmm.
that stress that there's something that's happening outside of you. There are bigger things outside of our control, like a job market, for example, or a state of economy, or a political system. But there's so many things that are within our control, and self-care is one of those, right? So this is entirely within your control, what you put in your schedule and how you spend that time. And there is actually deliberate action to spend that time to prioritize yourself, because that replenishes your energy, that gives validation to what I think, what I want matters, and I give myself permission to do that. A lot of times when we first go through this exercise, what we start with is that, build a list of 20 things that you like to do, not because somebody wants you to do them, not because they're important, not because they bring you return on investment, only because you like to do them. They bring you joy. So there's no other reason for them to exist, just to bring you joy. And that exercise seems very simple, but it's not easy to complete. It took me, when I first did that, it took me 10 days to complete, because I'd stop at number three. I said, well, I don't know what brings me joy anymore. So we actually get, day by day, we get into that state that we don't even remember anymore what brings us joy. And we devalue that. Everything else is important, right? So that launch, multi-million dollar launch for my company is important. So many people depend on me. I have so many employees under me. That's important. So you put that first, and you kind of neglect your internal voices. What is it that I want? So these are kind of simple things to do, but they're not easy. So there is a deliberate kind of effort to bring this back, and that's how you start, little by little. Gratitude. So many people talk about gratitude, but at the end of the day, what gratitude is when you train yourself to notice and appreciate things that you do want and you do like, instead of things that you don't like. So many of us are going to the kind of cycle of complaining. I don't like this, I don't like that. And then that puts you in less than productive state, because it drains energy instead of replenishing your energy again. So you show up at different, and once you have that energy to show up differently, then you actually understand how to build your life. You understand that you measure your work not by the number of hours that you put there, not by the number of meetings that you attend, but what value you bring to the company. So you actually measure your contribution into the job, especially in corporation and even in entrepreneurship, by the value that you created. And what actually happens is that you put priorities on things that bring you the biggest value. And those things usually don't take that much time. So once you give yourself permission to assess your performance by value, not by number of hours, not by number of meetings, not by number of interactions with other people, not how you show everyone else that you're busy, right? But you put the value and you learn to communicate that value and demonstrate that value, you free up so much time to bring that joy back into your life. It could be a time with your family. It could be pursuing your hobbies. Maybe you start painting again or dancing, what have you, right? But that kind of brings that enjoyment back into your life, and then you actually start to see meaning in that again, because you do have that energy, right? You responded to your internal impulses that are true to you, that you kind of forgot or neglected. So that's kind of the personal, really personal development work that happens. And it's very important on the executive level, because the pressures are so high and the position is so visible, that you tend to kind of skew your attention toward that and neglect your personal well-being.
Yes, I do resonate so much with that. Recently, I found myself doing things only when there was some kind of ROI on it as well, right? And so for me, it was something super silly. And so I play tennis, right? And somebody told me I should go play pickleball. And I was like, I thought it would be fun. But I said, when I go play a sport, it has to give me exercise. It's got to get cardio. I got to get more fit when I play. And pickleball isn't any of that. So for a long time, I actually mentally struggled with allowing myself to just play pickleball just purely because it brings me. I struggled with just saying, you know what, but tennis or running gets me in better shape. But I was like, yeah, but pickleball is fun.
Mhm.
And I just want to do it just because it's fun and it just brings me joy, like you said. And I found that I was just like, why am I struggling with this? Why can't I just do it for the sake of being fun
Mhm.
and nothing else? And I guess we get so much into optimizing everything in our life, right? Because
Mhm.
everything is got to be like, oh, two birds with one stone. If I can do this and this at the same time, I can knock it all out and get so much more done. Sometimes I think we forget and lose sight of the things that need to be done just purely for the fact
Mhm.
that you just enjoy it or it's just kind of hella good fun.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and that's there's an element of permissions. Like I allow myself, speaking of abundance, I'm sure that a lot of you probably touch on the notion of abundance. What is abundance? And it's not just material abundance, it's actually abundance of resources in general. So there is an abundance of resources that I can allow myself to have fun just for the fun of it, for the joy of it. The joy in itself is actually a resource that I need, right? And the resource that I want, it's a value to me. So there's an abundance of that joy that I can give
Hmm.
myself permission to explore that. So sometimes it's really extreme. I worked with medical doctors, for example. They don't even allow themselves
Hmm.
to go outside for 5 minutes just to be in the sun during the day because they're so driven by schedule, going from seeing one patient to another, to another, to another. They don't really allow themselves to take 5 minute break, right? But you have to understand that that's important because if you don't fill your cup, right? So that's what we hear as well. But this is what it means. Like if you
Hmm.
don't replenish your energy, you don't have that energy to give. And the way you replenish it, you give yourself permission to enjoy life. And it does not have to be elaborate vacations. It would be nice, of course, but
Hmm.
it's actually an everyday practice. You do three of those things every day and you put them on the calendar. Like I do go outside for 5 minutes between 1:05. And because I really like it, I do it just for
Hmm.
me, for the sake of honoring me and honoring my value of self-worth and so on and so forth. So yeah.
Yes, no, I totally have been working on that myself and allowing myself to do things just for the sake of joy and not so much trying to overly optimize my life. I think we get into that as well. So let me ask you about startup world. Okay. I live in Austin right now and it is all the rage and everybody here is probably some part of startup or considers themselves a founder of some kind. The culture of startups, as you probably know, is one of building something from scratch, 0 to 1. And most of those times it is all hands on deck for quite a bit of time to kind of get them off the ground because usually it's a small team of people bootstrapping things or just getting really scrappy. So how can you advise them from not killing themselves in the first year of their business? Because I think it is the natural tendency because they're excited about it, right? They find joy in doing that. But like how do
Yeah.
you make sure they still pump the brakes a little bit and
Right.
not go spend the next, 80 hours a week for the next year or two?
Right, right. So you have to be driven. Yes, a startup is a different world. And actually, what I find is that
Hmm.
it does require kind of a certain. They're not everybody going to startups this way. A lot of people go there for a right reason. A lot of people go there for wrong reasons. So, which goes back to our original conversation about your why. Why are you going there? So I worked with quite a few people who were quite successful in their corporate careers by all standards, right? Mostly like in sales, like sales for enterprise software companies, for example. You can, it's probably very close to entrepreneurship with the security of a corporate structure. And they reached good success there in that career, but then kind of felt that there's a stagnant feeling that they wanted more, something maybe more fulfilling, and they would quit their corporate careers. And they think that what they want is really to go into start, only to find out once they go to startups that they are not as successful. They're even more stagnant. because it's a different world. So that's a perfect example of a person quitting a perfect career, a really nice, successful career for the wrong reasons. There's something else was missing. It's not necessarily corporate versus entrepreneurship. But then there are a lot of people who go to startup for the right reason, that their risk tolerance is much higher. They are much more driven by that contribution to really build something from scratch. But at the end of the day, even if you are going there for your passion, you still can burn out. You burn out for the same reasons, right? You place that value again into putting the hours into driving toward that one single goal, forgetting that you are a multidimensional, multi-passionate being, that you actually need more than just career to thrive and feel alive and fulfilled and in harmony. So all those things that we just talked about, they still apply in the entrepreneurship world. You are very driven by your goal, but do you enjoy the journey, right? So you have to enjoy the journey as well, not just driven by the goal, because as we discussed, once you reach that goal, that on itself does not bring you harmony and balance and happiness. That just brings you a short-term satisfaction. So to enjoy that journey, you have to look into what is it you enjoy. You have to build that. You still have to put the boundaries around demands on your time. You still have to understand what value you create, that you're not driven by survival stress reaction and you drive everyone else around you to the ground with this, right? So you control your fears, right? A lot of it is really driven by fear, that survival reaction. You control your fears with tools and practices to maintain the state of mind that allows you to enjoy that journey and control, feel in control.
What Okay. So you speak about some tools and practices. What tools or what practices would you recommend somebody that is maybe in the thick of things right now? That is just like months into the startup, they're getting ready to prototype their first product. They're in beta and launch
Yeah.
phase. What can they do to avoid burnout?
Yeah.
What practices, maybe daily
Yeah.
practices, morning
Yeah.
rituals? What do you
So I
recommend?
usually talk about two levels, for burnout. And the
Hmm.
first level is really stress management. I think all of us need to have stress management techniques. It's just that's how our life is right now. This is the reality of it. There are a lot of pressures. So that what stress management is. You really kind of you're managing your survival mode, right? So you're switching between your survival mode to your rest and digest mode. So that's what we do when we talk about stress management. It's applied to everyone, whether you're an entrepreneur building a startup in the thick of it, whether you're in a corporate career, whether you are homemaker. People feel this stress at different levels, right? So it's very personalized reaction.
Hmm.
And those are your breathing techniques, right? So you have to understand what's happening when you do the breathing technique. So once you're in stress reaction, your breathing becomes very shallow. You don't notice it. So you practice that breathing. I usually talk about box breathing because you don't need to have a certification in breath work to do this. You inhale on 6 counts, you hold on 6 counts, you exhale on 6 counts, and you hold on 6 counts. And that's something that I would suggest to do every morning, whether you think you're stressed or you think you're not stressed, because that's what it does. It actually brings you out of that stress mode into rest and digest mode, sends the signals to your nervous system that you are safe, you're not in survival, and it helps you to mobilize more energy to do things in that calm mode, rest and digest mode. So breathing techniques for sure. Moving, what stress reaction does, it mobilizes your system, and usually in the normal kind of survival cycle, it has to end with an action. We just accumulate and accumulate stress, and we don't actually complete that
Hmm.
stress cycle. So movement helps. Any kind of movement, quite frankly, it does not have to be an elaborate workout routine. Obviously, when you're in the thick of it, you don't want to, it's very hard for you to actually carve out an hour to work out. If you can, fantastic. If you can't, just very simple movements. It could be stretching. It could be just clench and relax your muscles, clench and relax. It could be a brisk walk, 10, 15, 20-minute walk. But the reason
Hmm.
why it helps is because it helps you to complete that stress reaction again, get out of the survival mode, get into the rest and digest mode, which is much more natural. That's how we need to spend our bodies are built to spend our life in rest and digest mode, not in fight or flight mode. And then, visualization, meditation is also very good. I would encourage everyone to practice. It does not have to be, again, you don't need to go. It would be great if you do, but you don't need to go on a 10-day silent retreat to learn to meditate. It could be 5-10 minutes of guided meditation, tons of them online right now.
Hmm.
It's a very easy. What it
Hmm.
does, it helps your brain to switch for 5-10 minutes. You interrupt the pattern, you switch your fears, your fearful thoughts that are running
Hmm.
totally uncontrollably. What's going to happen if I miss this deadline? And we assign this huge meaning to that missed deadline. So meditation helps to switch again back to rest and digest. Those are simple things. I call them first aid. These are first aid techniques. We are burning
Hmm.
out, and it's literally burning out, physiologically. The reason why it's called burnout, because we're literally burning out our systems. So when you're in that fight of flight mode, everything else shuts down. So it's just your endocrine system working, your adrenaline is working overtime, and everything, and gets ready to either kind of fight that lion or run away from that lion, right? And like the entire body just mobilizes into this. So you have to switch it and give a chance to your body to actually relax and replenish, so you could make decisions with the best judgment. A lot of
Mm.
people come and they
Yes.
say, oh, visualization doesn't work for me. Meditation doesn't work for me. Visualization doesn't work for me. It's like, well, if you're in an anxiety right now, your visualization works fantastic. What that's what it is, right? So you imagine all kinds of scenarios that can happen. So the work here is really to switch it into a more productive mode, right? So like you're a great visualizer, like your imagination just running wild. um,
Yes, I think a lot of people realize that too. They think it's fear is just your imagination unguided,
right.
right?
So
So
what do they
you're
say?
right.
They're like
It's a
99% of what we're afraid of will never happen, right?
right. Yes. Let me ask you this. You've talked a lot about burnout, okay? And I think that word gets tossed around a lot, and we're starting to hear about it more and more. How does somebody know if they are experiencing burnout? What are the symptoms and what is it?
So what it really is, this chronic stress reaction. You accumulate that stress, and that stress cycle never completes.
Hmm.
So basically, you're stuck into the survival mode when there is no threat to survival. Objectively, there is no stress to survival. There's no lion, in the bush. There's no mountain that's going to crash on your head right now. Objectively, there's no threat to survival, but you are
Hmm.
assigning that threat to everything around you, like including, I don't know, like flood in Africa somewhere. You listen to the news, there's flood in Africa, and you start worrying about that there may be flood next to your door. So that imagination is running wild, the fear that's running wild, you're in that survival mode. That's what it is. Now, a lot of us experience it differently. I think, underlying kind of thread there is a red thread there is exhaustion. You feel exhausted, and that's kind of a chronic exhaustion.
Okay.
So it's like you feel tired, and no matter how much rest you take, you still feel tired, right? So you sleep for 12 hours, you wake up,
Mm.
you're still
Okay.
tired. So exhaustion is kind of, if you're tired all the time, and no matter whether you slept, you didn't sleep, you ate, you didn't eat, but you feel exhausted, that's a very good sign of a symptom of a burnout. Now, there are other symptoms as well. Each of us experience it differently. It could be changes in your eating patterns, for example. You lost appetite, or you crave everything, you like eat all the time. And again, going back to that physiological reaction, so when you're in that survival mode, every other system actually shuts down. Your digestive system shuts down, your reproductive system, everything shuts down. Only that endocrine system working overtime, producing adrenaline and making you ready to jump. So that's why you have all these changes, right? So it's changes in your eating patterns, changing in your sleeping patterns. You really have to kind of look at how do you react to stress, and if that's what accumulates, that's how it's going to manifest. But exhaustion is probably a pretty good sign. And then there's some psychological issues, like I'm not motivated, I can't force myself to do anything anymore. So one example, I took a kind of a time management class.
That some
Yeah, I took a time
yeah,
management
mhm,
class
go ahead.
once, and there was a lady there. It's like she was in the customer service role, and she said, "I have this ticket that's been sitting on my desk for a month now, and I cannot find time to open it. Can you give me a time management technique so I can organize my time better?" And it wasn't really time management. I remember I was sitting there and thinking, no time management technique is going to help you. It's really a motivation. You burn out. You cannot motivate yourself. You cannot find that kind of drive to do anything. That's a sign of burnout.
A lot of those symptoms sound a lot like depression almost.
You know,
Because exhaustion, lack of motivation, minus the feeling sad, I guess. But like when you feel exhausted and you feel unmotivated, sadness kind of accompanies that sometimes as well. Obviously, not wanting to get out of bed for days on end. I guess that's more depression. But like, how do you distinguish the two? Because it seems like they share quite a bit of the same symptoms, right?
I really like to talk about people who are not. It could be that probably some of those that manifest as a what we call a burnout symptoms. It could be signs of depression. So it always makes sense to check with a professional on that as well. A lot of times it is really that, right? So it's really our, we are exhausting ourselves by not knowing kind of a basic steps of managing our body. We don't know how our bodies work, and we kind of subside to the fears of unrealistic fears, I'd say, and just not applying this awareness techniques to actually bring ourselves to that state of well-being. So because on that spectrum of this, there's something that people talk quite a lot right now is kind of languishing, right? So it's not quite burnout, but what's called languishing. It's kind of a state between the joy and depression. So you're not really, you're not really burning out, but you're not really thriving. It's kind of the absence of thriving, so yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
you're just not happy. I think what I like to talk about is really a well-being. It's like, where do you want to be, and where you want to
Mm-hmm.
be is available to you regardless of your current situation, whether you're again corporate or entrepreneur, if you're busy, you're not busy. What is available to you, what do you want, and that's available to you, and there are steps to get there without really going into a deep thinking of whether there's a clinical, and sometimes there's some clinical component to that, but most of the times it's really
Yeah.
us being not knowing how to manage our state of well-being.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I wasn't trying to start adding labels to people and trying to add label because to me at the end of the day it's an experience that you're having, right? Whatever the hell you want to label it, if there's a clinical name or a cultural name we want to call things. And I guess for me it was more about understanding and being able to understand like what is actually happening, right? If it's because obviously if you suspect that it could be, depression versus burnout, I think the actions are somewhat similar in terms of, getting yourself out of the fight or flight mode and getting into a more, you know, relaxed state,
Mhm.
like you said, rest and digest mode instead of just like freaking thinking there's a saber-toothed tiger somewhere running around all the time and your body's just like freaking out, right? And I think a lot of people still stress out about a lot of things and it may not ever get to the point where they quote unquote burn out, but it manifests itself in illness and, other issues with the
Yeah.
body
Mhm.
where, yeah, you see that it manifests in some long-term illnesses or digestion issue, fatigue, like you said, and a lot of other things that people don't quite relate or attribute to the high levels of chronic stress that
Mhm.
they have just all the
Yeah.
time.
But I,
Pervasive,
but
right?
I do want to emphasize, though, is that the
Hmm.
stress management technique is really kind of the first aid. And it's kind of like a band aid. So you
Hmm.
have to master this so that you know how to switch from one mode to another. You kind of recognize that, oh, I'm in this unhealthy mode,
Hmm.
I can switch to healthier mode quickly with these techniques. But fundamentally, again, it's
Hmm.
really about what is the life that you want to live. And I think that we are just kind of following the cycle and following the directions that were given to us without really thinking or without giving ourselves permission to say, what is it that I want? What is it the life that I want to live? How that harmony looks for me? How does it feel for me? And kind of making steps to create that purposefully. So that's what's going to get you out of the burnout or languishing
Mhm.
sustainably, right? So like every day you're happy, you're vibrant, you're full of energy. The world around you is bursting in colors, so you're thriving, right? So that's, I think, the setting yourself up for that, what's really a recipe against burns
Mhm.
out more sustainably.
That's beautiful. I love everything we've spoken about today. So, to kind of summarize it, if you were to give somebody, say, just three tips of the things that you've spoken about, what do you think would be great three tips to help people that are on the striving and driving kind of mode to find more balance or find more fulfillment in what they're doing?
Yes. So the first one is manage your stress management techniques. Pick three, whatever, make them your routine, just build them into your day. So that's the first one. The second one, self-care. Get the list of things that you like to do and schedule three of them a day. You'll see miracles in your life. The third is, I really encourage everyone to think about, what is it? How does the life I love feel like, look like, and take steps to implement that. It's your decision.
Ah, that's beautiful. I love that. So, if people wanted to find out more about you, how would they find you or look you up? Where are you active at?
Yes, so I am on LinkedIn, Victoria Mensch. You can reach out and we can talk about kind of a blueprint for the life you love. I
Hmm.
also organize retreats. The next one will be in Bali at the end of October. So if you're interested in that, how to take yourself out of the routine and, spend 10 days.
What is a retreat about?
It's
What is a
called
routine? What is a
Elevate
retreat?
Beyond Success. So you spend 10 days to reconnect with yourself, to reset your life, to reignite, rejuvenate, and set kind of the goals for the next stage of your life. Bring yourself to another level. So reach out to me through LinkedIn and I can share more information about this and how to kind of feel alive again.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I am so blessed to have had this hour with you. I'm pretty sure there's people that are going to get so much value out of listening to what you shared with us today. Any last words?
Don't be afraid to dream. The life that you love is available to you right now.
I love it.
Thank you, Trung.